Hi everyone, we're here today with special guest Peter Kuper from World War III Illustrated, which he founded in the 80s, if I'm right, with
1979.
79, okay, almost 80s, with Set Top Man, and it's a magazine that does political comics and social commentary through comics with a volunteer roster of different creators. He also has done the comic Spy versus Spy in Mad Magazine and also adaptations from Frank Casca's work. And we're gonna first of all show you a little background on comics in general, on the relationship between Peter and comics, and on some stuff about World War III Illustrated from another view, since we already had said a while ago talking here, so we're gonna take a new approach to it, and we hope you enjoy it a lot. So with all, I give you the clearance to go for it.
Shall I take it away?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to just do a little presentation here. And so this is the cover of the new issue of World War III by Jose Munoz, incredible Argentinian cartoonist living in Italy. So I thought I'd just go back a little bit on our history, and all the way back, actually, to prehistoric times, when the idea that humans want to leave some mark behind to let us know that we're here, that we've tell our story and express our existence. And this has been going on for a long time. And I think because of this initial desire, I think it really is in our DNA to want to create some way of leaving a indication of our passing. Like, we wouldn't know our shopping habits if it weren't for the art that was left behind. This is actually Banksy. He put this up in the British Museum, and it lasted for 2 weeks before somebody noticed and took it down. So well done, Banksy. So our first language is actually in pictoforms like this. And so we really think in visual terms as a culture. There's the codexes from Mexico that really read like a comic book. They have recurring characters, and you read down and across, and they were in book form like this. Perhaps some of you have been reading this comic for a while growing up, or still are reading it. Sequential panels telling a story. That's very much what comics is all about. This is from the 13th century. It was the history of the world done in a tapestry, and it has panels, and you're following the story that you may be familiar with, and done in these great visuals with no text. In the murals, I spent a couple of years living in Mexico. I was in Oaxaca, Mexico, but I visited and saw these incredible Diego Rivera murals in Mexico City. And in them, I realized more than ever how much these murals are like comics. They have recurring characters. At the bottom, he's got the black and white panels of daily life. If you look in the upper left, there's this creepy character with a sword, and then lead down to, there's Cortez, and then you see the creepy character again doing a deal with Cortez, probably selling out the locals. And Cortez reappears several times in this. And you really are reading a story here when you look at these images, and it's the horror story of colonialism in 1520. Artists through history like Goya, who I had the opportunity to see his brilliant work in the Prado, have been recording not only kings and queens, as he did a lot of to make a living, but also recording the political events of his time. The disasters of war, for example. Daumier is another artist, French artist, who was doing this. He did this portrait of King Louis Philippe, and because of this drawing, he spent 6 months in jail. So there's a price to pay sometimes when you're criticizing the leaders, but that didn't stop Damier. In the United States, there was this cartoonist Thomas Nast, who's famous for doing cartoons about this guy named Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed was running a very corrupt political machine in New York City. He helped his constituency. He helped the Irish that were coming over, and he kept on getting replaced and put back in office, but he was also stealing from the treasury. And because of these drawings, people recognized him. And when he was going to be arrested in the United States, he fled to Portugal, and the customs officials recognized him from this portrait, and he was captured, and he died penniless in jail. Woohoo! So that's strike one for the cartoonist. So there were venues, outlets for revistas like the masses that gave a forum to artists who were talking about what was going on. This is Robert Miner's Perfect Soldier from World War I. And in Germany, there was Simplicissimus. And this is a magazine that gave artists like Kathy Kollwitz and John Hartfield and George Gross, some of my favorites, a platform so they could do this kind of work. And they also got shut down when Hitler came to power. There's always this, it's always interesting to me, that the powers are so threatened by art that they need to shut down and threaten or even try and kill or succeed in killing the artists who are making these criticisms. So it's clear that art is in fact a powerful medium, that it can threaten these. Also, lucky you in Madrid who get to see the original of this. And it was in the Modern Art Museum in New York for a while, so I got to see it many times there, and then came and visited it again, and all of the side drawings. If you're ever in Madrid and there's no COVID, go see it. It's Guernica by Picasso, and it's another example of just the different worlds, fine art world, illustrators and fine artists moving back and forth, cartoonists talking about what's going on politically. Ben Shahn, another favorite of mine, an American artist who was during the Depression, the Great Depression in the 1930s, he was, they did something unusual in the United States, which is when people were out of work, like artists were out of work, they actually said, it's not just that you need to get a job, it's that your job is being an artist. And so under Roosevelt, they developed the WPA, the Workers' Progress Administration, that actually paid artists to do murals. And Ben Shahn was hired to help pick those artists and also do murals himself. And so they kept a lot of artists employed. Another very important venue for political artists and art, and a big influence on me, was Mad Magazine. That's the first place I saw humor and politics meet. The second place was in Underground Comics. This is Robert Crumb. And Underground Comics talked a lot about sex and drugs, thankfully, because that was a lot of fun. But they also talked about what was going on politically. And I learned about the environment from this, and about a lot of things came through in the comics that I was reading as I moved through from superhero comics of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and Thor and Spider-Man, and started to look at other forms of art done in comics. So this is an image that was commonly on walls during the Vietnam period of college students. And it's a very lovely sentiment and beautiful drawing. And it was just, very uplifting. This is a very common symbol we still have around that was developed in the 70s, and saw this all the time. And growing up then, I really wanted to do happier art. And it was just, unfortunately, there were certain circumstances, like say the Vietnam War that was raging, that made me think about things beyond the smiling face and influenced the direction that my work took. Another important influence, just when I was coming into art school and just starting to do my own work and try to prepare for a career in art, was, I don't know if you can recognize him, but this is Ronald Reagan. And my friend Seth Tabachman and I had moved from Cleveland, Ohio, where we grew up, to New York City, and we were going to art school together. And we were doing comics, and we wanted to do comics with political subject matter, and there was no outlets for them because the underground comic scene had died. They used to be distributed through like record stores and head shops, which sold like bongs and incense and black light posters, and they got shut down during the drug war. And Ronald Reagan was just about coming to office, and he was very much promoting the idea of the Cold War with Russia, and we were really scared about there being a nuclear war. So Reagan did get elected, and though he may not recall, and he promised a less bureaucratic shadow government. That's The Onion, another joke paper. And because of this fear we had, the title World War III Illustrated seemed like it would be appropriate for the title. And we were in this Cold War with Russia, and that was very much a real threat, but we've gotten that all taken care of now that Russia's working with us so closely, and Donald Trump in particular. So we realized, though, we were talking about these issues that we'd read about in the newspaper, and that were far away from us. And we realized we could actually talk about what was going on our very streets in New York City, and that it was a microcosm for what was going on in the world. And year after year, now Seth and I started the magazine together, but very quickly other people joined us. I mean, it always had other artists in it, and new people came in, and new people edited the magazine. We would have been burnt out completely if we just kept doing it ourselves and fighting with each other. And that this was an opportunity to make a community of artists that weren't just, I always felt like I was missing out on all these great art movements, like the Beat Generation and the underground comics, because every time we were either too young, or I missed the Summer of Love, darn it, and I was too young, I hadn't hit puberty yet. And so all these things that were passing us by, and we just felt like, there's always these art movements that are gone when we get there. So unintentionally, we started creating our own, and that was a better way to go. And a lot of people came around the magazine as an opportunity to do the types of things that we were wanted to address, and were interested in comics. Sometimes they were artists who hadn't done comics before, and they were doing their first piece in comics. And that it was one of the things that we were doing with the magazine, was creating the opportunity for people to get the experience of being published and interact with other artists and get develop their politics. That's the last cover was by me. This one's by Eric Drucker, our prison issue. What we started to do is have themes for issues, which was a way to organize it. Sabrina Jones, who became one of the editors, Eric also was an editor. Many of these people, did more and more work that rose up as what made the magazine continue to happen, because it would be impossible to do this without having a circulating group of editors and contributors. And it also opened the door on broadening our subject matter by having more women work on the magazine, by having more people of color. It was a way to expand the reach and what we were talking about. So it wasn't just our limited perspectives. This is one of the anthologies that we had published. And a particularly important point was around September 11th, because that was an issue where we really came together quickly, and we had many of us had been in New York City and experienced what happened on 9/11. It was a direct experience. And at that same time, there was really a big shutdown in what you could talk about in mainstream media. And it was a point where I realized how important it was to have alternative media that could address these issues at a time when you otherwise weren't going to see these opinions published anywhere. I was working for a lot of mainstream magazines. I was working for the New York Times, for Time Magazine, and many of the articles I illustrated got killed or censored just by saying, they'd say, oh, well, we don't think that drawing is working. And it was, you know, sort of a light way to censor it, but it would just never make it to print. And I certainly couldn't do an 8-page comic about my experiences, but with World War III we could. And suddenly our audience expanded. And this issue, we actually, we normally were publishing, say, between 3,000 and 5,000 copies, and we sold out right away, and we had to go back to press because so many people were clamoring to see the issue. And where we normally, when we had a release of an issue, it was mostly people who contributed to the magazine that came. Then we had a show, and like 300 people came and were anxious to talk about what was going on. So it's times like these that you really recognize that you need to have these alternative sources. This was a follow-up issue that's covered by Mac McGill. This is the issue that we did before we went into Iraq in 2002, before the Bush administration raced us into what they said was going to be a quick, easy in, easy out 6-month war, which has now been perpetual. You know, unfortunately, we don't get to say "I told you so." It doesn't really work that way, and there's no benefit in that. But we were there were people who were very conscious that how bad of an idea this was, and you weren't seeing that in a lot of media. And it was really important to get this word out. And if nothing else, World War III stands as an historic document of people who were standing up against the general flow of what the mainstream and what the political will was pushing us towards. This is our last anthology that went up to 2014, and that covered some of this history. And these are all around if you go looking for them. We've been talking about climate change since long before it was a subject that was on the table as much as it is now. And this is a more recent climate change issue, but it was not our first. So unavoidably, I'll have to talk about our US politics a little bit. We've added a new horseman to the apocalypse, the orange clown in back there. It's getting curiouser and curiouser. I actually illustrated Alice in Wonderland for Sexto Piso, a publisher in Mexico and Spain. So I had a pleasant association with it until this came along, and then it twisted the association. So don't stare too closely at this because it can cause blind rage. The has been a thorough eclipse of the light in this country. Now there's the wall that Mexico would pay for, and hopefully yet we'll have the opportunity to pay for this wall. So these are just some of the drawings that I've been doing addressing these current events. Here's the one that I did the day after the election. There's that golf ball that he keeps hitting. And this pretty much, for my mind, sums up the Trump years. So not a very beautiful perspective, but that'd be California in the background currently. And this is when I most feared that the ball was going to be handed back to Donald Trump after the election. It's still not over yet, but my best thoughts are with the Biden presidency. So yes, ice cream, ice cream, ice cream. And like I said, nobody likes an "I told you so." The problem with seeing things coming and warning about them. It's like Cassandra, famous Cassandra, who she could tell everybody what was going on, but it didn't change what happened. So this is a favorite cartoonist of mine, Linears. He's saying, "At least I get to weather the storm with you." And we're lucky we brought that umbrella. So that umbrella is what World War III is in a certain way. You know, it's not a huge umbrella, but it's something that we can stand under together. And our latest issue, the world we're fighting for, we started working on a year ago in September. And at that time, I was working on this comic about climate change, which was certainly not a light, upbeat subject, and it's certainly not been taken care of. But this is before COVID came rolling in, and we were all dealing with the pandemic, and we had to basically be very light and on our feet. But this was the story I was telling about my travels around the world. That was in Jordan, and Africa and the Galapagos. And I've been very fortunate enough to have the opportunity for many reasons to be able to travel. Sometimes I'm invited to places, and I realize in doing so, I've had a large carbon footprint. I mea culpa on that, but I've tried to take the information and turn it into something where I'm able to share and hopefully inform, so that these beautiful places I've got to see can stick around. So I was just talking about the places like Guatemala, where I actually, going there, I got to see what was happening in the rainforest, which when I got back made me even more anxious to talk about this and share this over the years. And there's a great quote from Charles Darwin where he says, "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent that survives, it's the one that's most adaptable to change." And right now we're being posed with this huge question of whether, with our enormous brains, that we're able to adapt enough to realize that our actions are causing these horrific problems. I do have some hope, crazily, thanks to the pandemic, that's demonstrated that we are forced to make great changes in a short period of time. And we have actually done that quite a bit. There's been such a huge seismic alteration that we've had to go through. And it does show internationally that we're capable of taking actions when our lives are at stake. So I think there are actions that we can take following, hopefully, when we have a vaccine and are all outside again, to talk about how we can address climate change. So these are some of the other contributions to the magazine. This is by Jordan Worley. The barking is by my dog.
Special feature.
Yes, it's a special feature. She's chiming in and going, "I don't want him to be president." Deb Lucky, it's a great piece on the idea of the witch hunt against Trump. The reason why it's going on is because he's actually a witch. And this is, the kind of hopeful thing. We thought we were just going to be talking about, the world we want to see and change and all that. And we were sort of put in the position of having to talk in broader terms about these things that are hitting us right now. And I do mean hitting. Not that this is anything new with Black Lives Matter, but the police are upset that we're protesting against police brutality. Suko, who one of the artists I grew up looking at and who influenced my desire to actually do this kind of work. She came and gave a talk at my art school, and she's still doing this work, and we're now working together. It's one of the joys of doing things like this, is that we get to work with some of our heroes and have this cross influence. This is another Jordan Worley. Mac McGill. There's the virus that in the United States we're dealing with directly in the name of our president. So suddenly we had to shift the direction of the issue and start doing drawings about, well, what people were turning drawings in on, which was their personal experience, which is what we really do with World War III. And it's one of, I think, the highlights of the magazine, is people using art to express their personal experience. And right now, especially, we live in this sort of post-truth time. If Donald Trump has anything to say about it, all the fake news that he keeps complaining about, that's just an attempt to throw up a smoke screen so that we don't look at what's really going on that is affecting our lives. And that I really think at a time like this is where art has a hugely important role. Picasso said, "Art is the lie that enables us to see the truth." I think that Trump is the liar that enables us to see the lie. So this is by Steve Brodner, and he started recording people who had died during from COVID, and he's been doing this like on an almost daily basis and posting it. But we published a section in World War III. This is a drawing I did for the New Yorker from my early influences of Dr. Seuss. Also fantastic, aside from being great children's book work, also very political. His work is quite political. And I utilize that. Sorry, I apologize, Dr. Seuss. And thank you, Dr. Fauci. Gravity's not going to tell me how to live my life. So that's QAnon, if you've heard of them. They're the insane group that is where goes one, goes all, or whatever their insane philosophy of we're all going down, and except for it's kind of a rapture perspective on things. They're going to be taken away to a beautiful place, and the rest of us are going to die if they have anything to say about it. So I do want to be a little reassuring. It's not all dark. This is by linears. There will be a time when COVID's not around. And when that time comes, we are going to get back to hugging and kissing and loving in ways that we haven't been able to. And we may even hurt ourselves with it. So it's just a very curious thing, but this pandemic is in fact an opportunity to reconsider and recognize the ways we've been lied to, the world that we could have, say, for example, with rent strikes that were, unimaginable, like they just would come down on you like a ton of bricks if you were to do a rent strike, which is now is being discussed, and they put a moratorium on rent in New York State for at least for a little while. The other crazy thing is, I have to say, I think the reason why Donald Trump didn't get reelected is because of the pandemic. And if you think about, there's a million reasons why he should have been thrown out of office long ago for cheating and stealing and destroying the environment. It took this pandemic to push things so far that even his lies, the fact he's currently lying about the fact that it's about to turn the corner, it's not really happening, nobody's really dying, all the things that he says that we know are not true are now fully revealed. And that is, it's a terrible cost to arrive at that. We've, passed, I think, over 1 million people are dead from this, and 10 million worldwide have contracted it, which is a very high price. But the destruction that Trump was doing, I'm always looking for, like, is there any benefit in something like this? And so hopes that, one thing that art can do is it doesn't have to just talk about what's wrong. It can tell you about what you'd like to see, the world we're fighting for, the possibilities. So I like to do happier art. I really do. I'm just constantly being pushed in the direction of something darker. But I love creating images that suggest the possibility of rising up and ways that we can come together. And we will certainly be challenged with that now, and in these United States and around the world, as we are being posed by dictatorships and people who are literally going to lie us into an early grave because they're making some money in the process. But I'm aiming to make some music that sounds more like jazz or reggae or rap or rock, or your choice, classical, than the sound of bombs dropping and people crying. And that's what we're all about with World War III. And we've been doing it for 41 years, and we are just getting warmed up. And that's my slideshow.
That was beautiful. So I have some questions about this thing, all this work. Do you want me to start in your work or in the magazine, the editing?
Your choice.
So let's start for your work. I realized, maybe this is like a legal detail, but I realized that your last piece, the one you put in the slideshow, that is about climate change, and that piece has something in common for me with I was reading some of the collected issues of World War III, and there was a piece that you did that was Rapture about a sermon that was playing.
Jerry Falwell,
The,
yes.
yes, and it was like a translation, like you were not adding words but images, and for me it was the similar thing for me was that you were doing some kind of mixture between a comic and a collage or something like that. I do
Yes.
collage, so I
Yeah.
love collage art.
I love collage, yes.
So that really drove me in the way that I was like, these two things are somehow related in the sense that you are channeling things that are not necessarily like your mind's creation or whatever, but like looking at the world and challenging what you wanna what you wanna put in the first perspective to showcase something. Two very different things, but two things that are alarming both and that are critical. So you are doing that in two different ways because it's not the same to draw what you hear in words than to put images and then draw over them and etc. And I don't know, I want to ask you how you feel about your relationship with doing this thing about reflecting things that is not exactly like coming up with an idea, but like, oh, I this then is important and this is the way to showcase it.
You
Something
mean to
like that.
adapt? You mean adapting text
Hmm.
that way? Which
Yes.
I've done a lot of actually in my own work and in things for World War III with Kafka. And my last book was Heart of Darkness, an adaptation of Joseph Conrad. And also, I'm interested in comics and cartooning in so many, all the different ways that one can do it. So I'm interested sometimes in taking somebody else's words. I've worked with writers occasionally. I worked with Alan Moore, who did Watchmen. I did a comic with him one point. Harvey Pekar is another writer who and I like that interaction where the ideas are presented. Kafka was perfect because his stories gave me so many different ideas. It gave me ideas for how to do storytelling that I didn't have in my own work as much. It was almost like he was whispering in my ear. So I like that part of it. And in the case of that piece that you were talking about, the Jerry Falwell, it was a sermon that this crazy, super evangelical, right-wing Christian who was talking to Ronald Reagan at the time, and he was putting forward the idea of the rapture and that that we're going to get to go up and everything's going to be great, and then all those horrible sinners are going to stay on earth and die, and he seemed to be pretty happy about that, and he promoted the whole idea of politics in religion, like that you would get up there and your sermon would be to promote like go out there and buy more guns and support candidates in a way that was really like ending the separation of church and state. And so I wanted to take his words and ironically flip them. And that's another aspect of what you can do is the drawing in relation to the words can change the meaning of the words a lot. It becomes this ironic commentary. So I like journalism in comics. I like to do autobiography. I talked about losing my virginity in comics a while ago, or you name the topic: bad girlfriend, bad relationships, funny things. Being in New York during 9/11, seeing the building smoking outside, from my window, and then doing things that are light and humorous, but with political context. I'm always interested in having social political commentary. That's a driving force in my work. But I really like to experiment with styles. I get bored if I do one kind of thing. So I did stencils and spray paint. I think I've done 4 whole graphic novels in stencils and spray paint. The System was one of them. I did the Upton Sinclair's The Jungle I adapted, that was published in Spain. Also, I think it's La Selva or La Jungla. I forget what the title was. Norma published it. So like there's all those different areas, subject matter and approaches to comics, and then there's styles that you can use. And I feel like style is just something, it should reflect the text. It needs to be in the service of the story. So when I did Kafka, the style is like kind of like German expressionism, which had a big influence on me. And it's part of my style is whatever is working at the time. And I go through changes on purpose and because I just can't help myself. When I spent 2 years living in Mexico, I did a lot of drawing in my sketchbook. And the stencil and spray paint just didn't feel right there. It stopped working for me. I had done it for, I don't know, 20 years, and it started to feel like it was from a different era. And my sketchbook style, the way I drew in my sketchbook is what I wanted to do. And so I did a book called Ruins, that is done in a much more, it felt like Mexico and it felt like more of a sketchbook style. And that, I just think that for me, that's the way to go with all these experimentations, because comics is still in its infancy as far as things you can do with it that are new. Just by doing stencil comics, nobody, as far as I know, nobody had done stencil comics before. Seth came the closest with these kind of single images, text and picture, with this amazing piece he did called You Don't Have to Fuck People Over to Survive. But mine was I did a full sequential storytelling, but in stencil spray paint. That's just, that's one way to do it. And just by doing a different style, I did something that hadn't been done in comics as for graphic novels. And so in a lot of ways, it's easy to do something new in this form because it's still happening. I also love looking back at the history of it, like the old comic strips, people like Winsor McCay and Crazy Cat and George Harriman, and see what was being done in the early 1900s, because they did some brilliant work. There's so many different resources for seeing what you can do with the form.
That sounds great. Like I imagine we will see very different comics in some years, because like the medium is changing a lot. I will get more into this later, because like it's you did these full pages of Colleen that are like they're like digital work, but they seem like I asked her about this, and they seem like very like calling to some art that is very old, that is like this
1930s posters.
Yes,
Yeah,
that.
Absolutely. Ben Shahn, what I showed a picture by him. Absolutely, yeah. That's
but it's doing it in a different way, because it's very like the way that you look at it is like very digital, very different, it's just a different feeling, and it's like adapted for modern stuff. So I get what you're saying, like there's not a lot done in comics, that there's still a lot to do.
No, and also you can reflect on old art like that. You can reflect on art from a different period and yet do something that's very modern. Some of it just transcends. I mean, like Kafka's writing, to me, it just seemed incredibly modern. Even the stories that he's telling, I relate to him as being my, same stress, same concerns, things like that from right now. So it's very interesting. And I like the idea of art that can transcend time like that, which a lot of it can.
On your adaptations of Kafka, I was very interested on that, because he was one of my favorite writers when I was like in high school or something like that, because I wasn't having, because he's great, but also because I wasn't having a lot of artists that I connected to. And with time, I think it's also that he was a working class artist, which was not that usual in the kind of stuff we read in high school.
Right.
Not that it didn't happen, because it did happen, but not usual. And a lot of his work is very influenced by, capitalism and surviving capitalism. And, teachers never tell it like that. They don't tell you, like, at least to me, they never told me like Kafka is about surviving capitalism and, he's kind of dealing with the system that he's living in and coping with that with stories that showcase and put a mirror in the system, etc.
Yes.
They were like existential pain or something like that,
Yeah, I
which
know.
was
Human
not
condition.
all that is human condition.
Yes.
It was not all that it was happening here. It was some of that, but it was
Right.
not all
Right.
of that. And well, I'm interested in how you took the process of adapting that, because like I know you did some changes on the story to adapt them to connect better with,
Mhm.
you know, with how we're surviving that now. That there is the same kind of system that fucks up people or makes people have less time, have a, a life that is more isolated, have some stuff that was all in his work, like. And I'm interested in how you deal with that. I have seen some of it, and I like the style. I like the expressionist style. But I'm also interested in that
Um,
decision.
I think, you know, the thing that the beauty of Kafka is that he's so open to interpretation,
Hmm.
that you and I think it's in there. It's in the work naturally, but there's also a lot of subconscious things that are in there. You could, you know, like look at Metamorphosis and say, you know, did he actually turn into an insect, or is it, you know, a psychological book? And that, and so many of his stories, when I read them, I found naturally it spoke to me. Let's say there's a story called the Trees, and I read the words and I just thought, this is about homelessness.
Hmm.
And you know, somebody else is going to read it and not see that at all, and it doesn't make me right. That's just my interpretation of it, and that's, I think, you know, what I hope is that one of the things that I'm doing in these adaptations is I'm just showing one perspective on what you can do, and if somebody goes back and reads that, could get an entirely different point of view. There's a story called Before the Law, and I started drawing it one way, and then I just realized, wait a minute, this is talking about civil rights. This is talking about the horrible situation that African Americans are put in all the time, and but, or you know, any oppressed group trying to get justice. And I went in and I redrew it and made the character black. The main character is he's trying to get justice, and he comes to this building and he can't get past the gate, and the guy's just telling him, no, you can't, no, sorry, no, and he's there his entire life. And that just, you know, it suddenly read like that to me. I read A Hunger Artist, and I finished it. The book was published, and I looked at the day it was published. I looked at it and I was like, oh no, I just missed an opportunity. This really could be about food issues. And,
Oh.
and I know so many women in particular that suffer from just eating disorders are a huge factor. And so, and I kicked myself for not seeing that, but it was the book came out in paperback, and so I went back in and I redrew it, and I made the Hunger Artist a woman, and I just had to change, you know, the gender, you know, like you say, instead of he, it said she, very mild shift. But it got another, it was another layer, and I put that layer in there. I mean, was Kafka talking about that? I'd say probably not, but it worked. It spoke to me that way, and I kept on seeing those layers in his stories, and finding that anyway, it just was very interesting to see how much his stories could suggest. And I know I could go back to the same story and think about it again, and I would see another way I could tell that story. So that's a beautiful thing, and it also, to concentrate on the art and have the writing sort of send me in this direction was really, there's so much freedom in it as an artist, because thinking about the stories, and then he cross influenced the way I drew those stories, then started happening in my other stories, and like the ones I wrote. So I might write a story, and that it had the writing influenced my storytelling and then started to get into my fingertips.
I like that interpretation of Hunger Artist, because like I didn't thought about that when I read it, but I thought a little bit about eating disorders, but in a different context, or like uh, you know, of like someone that is so focused on work and has
Right.
to
Yeah,
go
no,
through. It's a still eating disorder.
it works fine that way, and I have it published both ways. I have it published as, and you would read it differently, you know. But I changed when I changed it up. I felt some kind of weight lift because I also wanted to talk about many different things in the book, and I wanted to address current events while I was doing it, you know, and move it forward so that there was a reason for somebody to want to read my version of it, and not just say I'll just go the original text, which I encourage people to do. Also, another factor was the humor in his work, which was what I first drew me to it. Is that I always thought about it when I read Metamorphosis, just like very dark. I read it in college, and I thought, "Oh, this is a dark work." And then I was reading his other things, and a friend of mine would read it aloud while we were drinking beer, and start laughing. And I read that Kafka used to laugh aloud when he read his stories to friends, and so I knew his intention was there. And that to do these as having humor in them, and that I also connected with, and that's what I'm trying to do with my work more and more, is really find the humor, because there's so much humanity when you can laugh. Even, you know, there's the humor in a concentration camp. Somebody's going to make a joke, even at the darkest point in your existence, and that can, you know, save your life.
So, with that phrase about your work, I want to ask you now about your editorial stuff. You as an editor, especially on this issue, which I recommend people to get. It's very beautiful inside. It's good. Sometimes in a terrible way, because this was done about what we are now. You all are now kind of not necessarily overcoming in a way, like
No,
getting over that.
Yes,
Yes,
addressing
like,
current events. Yes,
yes, and
we'll continue to address them.
yes, and I want to ask you, how was the editing process for you? Like, maybe for closing with this, how was getting in touch with the artists, with the ones you get in? How you make this process to get ahead something that is so broad, as I guess the people who will hear this now, because they will have all this stuff to know it. So
no, well, I mean, you've been interviewing. You're slowly making your way through the entire issue, interviewing
yes.
all of them. So
Yes.
somebody who's watching your show is going to know a lot about World War III and the process. This issue was very challenging, of course, because we started it a year ago in September, and that everything changed, you know, so that we had to reconsider while we were working on it, and then look at the work that was coming in. I also teach comics, and have for a very long time. I teach at the School of Visual Arts, and I also actually taught at Harvard. I teach at Harvard and University, and that it's given me the opportunity to talk about the form. And the reason why I actually wanted to initially teach was because there's so many things to consider when you do a comic, and to juggle all that in your head while you're working on one. I have to remind myself so much, and I just don't remember all the things, that all the pieces of it, the panel borders, the lettering, the characters, how to approach the single panel but the whole page, and then or a longer story. And by teaching it, I'm constantly reminding myself about these parts, so I don't forget while I'm working on it, and so that it really gets into my sangre, you know. So I'm thinking about it in a way that it's like I won't just so I won't miss some possibility. And editing the magazine and working with other artists is another way to do that. It's been a way to interact and look at what people are doing, and then talk to them about their work, which is exactly what I do as a teacher. And these days I do it on Zoom, which is sort of, you know, it's much more complicated, but still works. And so yeah, but shifting where we started with a theme, which thankfully was broad and actually positive, which these days you want to be negative, you don't want to be positive. But so you want to test negative but be positive. That it was you know, we had to change along the way, and that was challenging, but in I think in a good way. And it brought in a lot of different art And then we watched it also transform, where I talked to an artist and say, you have the piece is almost finished, but then maybe you really are going to want to talk about COVID now, or you want to talk about Black Lives Matter in this piece. Not that you couldn't have talked about Black Lives Matter for the last 400 years, but that that people were updating their pieces as they worked on them. Mm-hmm. And I had started, and I had this piece on climate change, and I knew that was going to sadly stay very much of a current event. So I didn't do a lot of rework on my piece, though I did reconsider how I wanted to end and what I wanted to say. But it was just very interesting to go through that process of transforming during the creation of the issue. But it's always a challenging. Every time I do an issue, I wonder how the hell we even get one done, because it's so complicated, and you have all the interrelationships, and you have to deal with a lot of different personalities, and you have to deal with your own ego and your own things that you think are important, and reconsidering your perspective. So one of the third editor, Ethan Heitner, did a really fantastic job. He had been one of my students and Seth's students at School of Visual Arts originally. Now that was long enough ago that he's an adult with a child. He had a child recently as a baby, and so here we are working with somebody who was a former student, and he's bringing in a whole bunch of new younger artists. Colleen was one of the people that he found, and a different perspective, I had tremendous respect for what he did and what he brought in, and it challenged some of my own. I'm now an older person. In the old days, when somebody said, "Hey, my friend showed me World War III," and the next thing it was, "My mother showed me World War III." People have actually said, "My grandmother showed me World War III." So I know I'm getting older. So, but this is what happens when you do something for 41 years. So, and there's a part of me that's like, don't slow down. And then there's the other part of me that's like, how fabulous. It's been passed on from, it's a generational thing. So, and people grow up on this. And one thing that we've heard for years about the magazine is we're preaching to the converted. And that's what they say to anybody who does any art or has any perspective that is already considered to be like, oh yeah, well, the left already agrees with that. So that's already preaching to the converted. But it's like, that's suggesting that somebody's born racist or born political or born in sin. I don't believe any of those things. So, nobody pops out with a political perspective like, Mom, his first words were Marx, So with that in mind, you have to say, like, my whole sense of, what kind of art I want to do is based on seeing people like Robert Crumb and George Gross and German Expressionism and Sue Coe, who we published in this issue, and these artists who were doing this kind of work. That's what informed my politics. And so I'm just trying to carry that torch on and pass it to another person, and that's how things are developing. And it's so this preaching to the converted, that's it's just a way to put it in a box so you can put it on the shelf. And it's also, then there's the choir needs something to listen to and read. So we are also, it creates solidarity. It's the umbrella that we get to hold over our heads together. So
that basing of the umbrella, it's a really great place to finish the interview. And for me, it was also really a great umbrella to have these days, being in my house and still dealing with, there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of places I want and need to help, and how to figure that. Having this book helped, so I hope it helps more people.
Well, thank you. Thanks for giving me and all these other people from World War III and probably a lot of other cartoonists the opportunity to express these ideas on your podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.